Good evening. Good evening. Welcome to Republican Labour Education Forum. The session tonight is a session showing solidarity to Julian Assange, whose appearance in the High Court is happening tomorrow and also Wednesday at his permission hearings. We're very delighted to have Russell Kaplan to speak to us about the trials of Julian Assange. And so I'm going to hand over now to Russell.
Thanks, Carol. We should really say the trials and persecution, torture of Julian Assange, and the degradation of British justice and the rule of law. What I am basically going to do is try and give a distilled account of that experience from the book that was published by the United Nations Special Rapporteur on Torture, Niels Meltzer, and I will show the cover of the book and details for people who are interested. It really is the definitive account and analysis of what's been going on. Of course, some of you may have already read the book, so you can then contribute to this discussion and point out the things that I have left out, because of course it is difficult for me to draw on all the detail. But I want to start off with an event perhaps seemingly unrelated, but in fact very much related. Last Friday, when the news started coming in of the death of Alexei Navalny in a Russian prison, being a fairly avid reader of The Guardian, on The Guardian, that news started coming through. And of course, it was shocking news. And then I began to read the various reactions and responses from the various political leaders in the West. And as I was reflecting on this, I sort of had a well of anger boiling up inside of me. And that was what my reaction was: what utter hypocrisy. And I decided to pen a letter to The Guardian. Of course, no surprises as to whether the letter was published. As far as I know, it hasn't been published and is unlikely to be published. But this is what I wrote. Reported death of Alexei Navalny. Before jumping on the moral high horse regarding the death of Navalny in prison, pointing to a violation of human rights and the rule of law with a less than independent judiciary that sentenced him, and other such democratic deficits of the Russian state against which Western liberal democracies proudly assert their superiority, we need to remind ourselves of our own Navalny, Julian Assange. The United Nations Special Rapporteur on Torture, Professor Niels Meltzer, has published an entire book, The Trial of Julian Assange, documenting a denial of human rights and the persecution and torture of Assange over a period of almost 10 years that has seen his health deteriorate to the point where there are real fears for his life. Meltzer writes, and opening of quote, "In the case of Julian Assange, so-called mature democracies of the West are systematically disregarding the rule of law and directly undermining fundamental constitutional rights indispensable to any democratic system. The prohibition of torture, the freedom of the press, the presumption of innocence, and the right to a fair trial. In 20 years of work with victims of war, violence, and political persecution, I have never seen a group of democratic states ganging up to deliberately isolate, demonize, and abuse a single individual for such a long time and with so little regard for human dignity and the rule of law." Close quote. I finish the letter by saying the righteous indignation displayed by Western leaders and commentators merely shines a light on their hypocrisy rather than any kind of principled defense of human rights and the rule of law. People in glass houses shouldn't throw stones. Now, when I wrote that, of course, I wasn't aware of the Niels Meltzer, the rapporteur, straying into any area to do with Navalny. However, over the weekend, when I was preparing for this talk and going through the book, I was surprised to find a fairly long passage in the book where he actually compares Western leaders' response to the alleged poisoning of Navalny. I don't know if people remember, they said he was poisoned with Novichok, and he was then flown to Germany. And so what I wrote was, in a sense, quite to the point, because Meltzer points out that on the 7th of October 2020, during a parliamentary session in the German Bundestag, the then foreign minister, Heiko Maas, was threatening Russia with targeted sanctions and all manner of a firm response to the treatment of Navalny should the Russians not provide sufficient explanation as to what happens. Meltzer then goes on to say, later during the same session, Maas is asked about the case of Julian Assange, and in particular about my official findings that his treatment violates the universal prohibition of torture, another blatant violation of international law. And then he says, suddenly the minister becomes significantly less combative. According to Maas, the German government has no information indicating that there have been violations of international law in both their accommodation and the treatment of Julian Assange. The minister believes that Assange deserves a trial in accordance with the rule of law, but sees no reason to accuse our British partners of any failure or whatever in this case. So unlike Russia, the United Kingdom is not being confronted with questions and demands from the German government and need not expect German sanctions should it fail to investigate the persecution of Assange and to provide the required clarifications. So let us have a look at how the British government has in fact undermined the rule of law, violated international law, and basically been involved in a process of systematic persecution and torture. And this is what Meltzer has to say about what this torture of Assange consists of. Defamation, humiliation, and demonization are key elements of psychological torture. Their purpose is not only to destroy the victim's self-esteem, sense of justice, and trust in the authorities, but also to deprive them of social support within the family, the community, and the broader public, and to trivialize their mistreatment or make it appear morally justified. As with mobbing victims in their private environment, the resulting feelings of isolation, shame, and hopelessness can push torture victims into nervous breakdowns or cardiovascular collapse, or even to suicide. Mobbing is not a trifle. It is a collective, cumulative form of cruelty. Nor is it torture light. It is torture. And in this book, in this account, Meltzer goes on to enumerate what this torture actually consists of. But it's important as a way of validating Meltzer's assessment of what has been going on with this process of persecution and torture. It's important to see that Meltzer initially was reluctant to take on the Assange case after being approached by his lawyers. It took months before he agreed to look into the case, and he acknowledges that the process of defaming, defamation, sullying Assange's character in the mainstream media impacted on him negatively in the same way as it was designed to impact the general public, to have a very, very negative view of Assange. So he basically spends a lot of time demonstrating of how this defaming actually worked and how he fell victim to the prejudice that this defaming engendered. So briefly, if we briefly, this whole this whole process begins, if people would remember, with the Assange is visiting Sweden during to attend a conference, I think a conference on freedom of the press or something. During his visit, the United States contacts the Swedish authorities and impresses on them to cancel Assange's credit cards and all his means of access to how can we say to liquidity. That makes it impossible for Assange to basically take up accommodation in hotels. So he ends up taking up accommodation with admirers, female admirers of him who are involved in some of the WikiLeaks activity. He sleeps with two of them. He has consensual sex with two of them. Initially, they don't know one another, but they speak because of they both involved in the WikiLeaks conference. They speak to one another and they express concerns about Assange not being too keen on using a condom, and they are worried about HIV infection. They decide to go to one of them knows someone in the I think Stockholm police force, and they simply want to get him to undertake an HIV test. When they get to the police station, the police have, it seems, clearly been contacted by the intelligence services, and they immediately, without the women's consent, turned their account. They basically told by the police that this is a rape. This is a rape incident, and prevail on these women to basically partake in a falsified process, which involves witness tampering, evidence tampering, failure to follow procedure. And in addition, they prevent Assange from knowing the full details of the complaint against him, and they wait for Assange to leave Sweden before they make a warrant for his arrest. So basically, they fit him up. They allow him to leave Sweden quite not as a fugitive. He leaves Sweden, and as soon as he has left Sweden, they produce an arrest warrant and basically say that he's a fugitive from justice with a case of sexual misconduct. I think they say even of rape facing him, without him being able to see the details and basically respond to the details. At that point, Assange knows that there's something quite serious afoot, and that he dare not go back to Sweden because of Sweden's record in submitting to US requests for extradition. So he ends up in the UK. So once he's in this country, the Swedish authorities want to implement or apply extradition so that he goes back to Sweden to answer to respond to these allegations, even though he's spent a considerable period of time making himself available to respond to these allegations. The conclusion is that the Swedes had no interest in what Assange had to say, and had no interest in actually concluding any kind of case against him, because they never had sufficient evidence to convict him. This is all about fitting, stitching him up, preparing him for extradition to the US. Assange is extremely concerned about being extradited to Sweden, so that he can be rapidly extradited to the US. So that's the Swedish side of the perversion of justice and the rule of law. And his image has now already been sullied by this false narrative that he's a fugitive from justice to basically stand trial on rape allegations, all utterly false. And the rapporteur Niels Malter goes into detail to show how that is actually false. I think Assange attends a hearing for an extradition hearing to Sweden, and then is put under house arrest. And during that house arrest, he realizes the full extent of what is likely to happen, and he seeks refuge in the Ecuadorian embassy, where he's given political asylum and given Ecuadorian citizenship, until the tenure of President Correa of Ecuador comes to an end, and under Correa's successor, Lenin Moreno, who succumbs to US pressure, he withdraws political asylum, which is questionable under international law, I understand, and he repudiates Ecuadorian citizenship, which is a violation of Ecuadorian law, and invites the UK police to basically come and seize Assange within the Ecuadorian embassy. So he's taken out of, people would have seen the pictures, how he's dragged out of the Ecuadorian embassy, and a few days later promptly appears before a judge at the Westminster Magistrates Court. and it is argued that basically the Swedish the Swedish charges at this point are dropped because of elapsed time, statute of limitations, and basically insufficient evidence. I mean, the Swedish dropped and opened the case about three times. And Assange's legal argument is that his initial violation of bail, where he fled to the Ecuadorian embassy, now is a technical issue. It's not a substantive issue of law, because there are no charges facing him. And by spending all that time in confined space inside the Ecuadorian embassy, his punishment has been over and above what the violation of the violation of his bail, over and above any punishment that should be incurred by the violation of his bail. In addition, it's argued that the working group on arbitrary detention, of which Britain, the UK government, participated, concluded that Assange was being unfairly punished, and basically had been punished in terms of his confinement in the Ecuadorian embassy. The senior district judge, by the name of Emma Arbuthnot, dismissed all these arguments and basically proceeded to mock and insult Assange. This is a quote from Meltzer's book. She basically showed utter contempt. He, Assange, appears to consider himself above the normal rules of law and wants justice only if it goes in his favor. For 2 years, the British government has participated in the working group on arbitrary detention, only to reject the findings of that working group. And Meltzer says the irony is lost on this particular judge. She's basically accusing Assange of only thinking the law applies to him if it works in his favor, whereas in fact it's the British government that is only willing to obey the law when it goes in their favor. But Meltzer goes on to argue that all the fine legal arguments were essentially falling on deaf ears, because the judiciary, it would appear, had already reached a consensus on the need to find legal, some kind of faux legal basis for handing Assange over to the US. And he points out that the judge already knew via a diplomatic note from the US requesting Assange's arrest for his impending indictment. So Judge Arbuthnot already knew about this. She was privy to secret information, and more importantly, Judge Emma Arbuthnot's husband, Lord James Arbuthnot, who's a Tory peer, held high positions in British defence industry and was until 2014 chairman of the Defence Select Committee. And WikiLeaks had published material on individuals and organizations with close professional and political connections to Lord Arbuthnot. In addition, it said that the judge had received gifts from a security company exposed by WikiLeaks. So now that raises the question of a conflict of interest. If we're speaking about fairness, justice, fairness, the rule of law, this judge should have not been anywhere near the Assange's case, and she should have recused herself. And then Meltzer goes in to demonstrate that had she correctly and appropriately recused herself, Assange would not have had to go to court and would have been free to leave the UK and basically escape this whole charade. Yet not only does she uphold his arrest warrant in 2018, she also presides over his extradition proceedings until the summer of 2019, where she appoints another judge who works directly under her. So in a way the conflict of interest still prevails. And you would have heard more about this judge. Her name's Judge Vanessa Barresta. And so he says, irrespective of their veracity, these alleged conflicts of interest create a reasonable perception of bias. Due process requires that any judge must recuse themselves as soon as the facts of the case suggest a real possibility of judicial prejudice. It is not only the right of the defendant to a fair trial which is at stake, but also the public interest in due process. Now, there's another judge involved. With the arrest warrant for the breach of bail carried out, Assange appeared 3 days later before someone by the name of Judge Michael Snow, and this was to consider the legal arguments, most important among them, the case for recusal of the initial Judge Arbuthnot. And rather than suspending the hearing, so had the hearing been suspended as it should have, again, Assange would have had the latitude to be able to walk free and probably leave the country and escape the charade. But instead, Judge Snow considers it unacceptable, grossly unfair, and improper for Assange to raise these questions and ruin the reputation of a senior judge. He again goes on to defame and insult Assange. before the public gallery, he describes it as laughable, the legal complaints, characterizing Assange as a narcissist who cannot get beyond his own selfish interests, even though the only thing Assange says throughout the hearing is, "I am not guilty," when asked to make a plea. Meltzer writes, quote, "The ease with which Judge Snow ridiculed and insulted Assange in open court was astonishing. Both judges must have been rather confident that their attitude expressed a consensus on Julian Assange that was shared not only within the British judiciary, but also within the other branches of government and mainstream media." Two more things I want to raise. Firstly, Meltzer, this is the special rapporteur, visits Belmarsh, requests to visit Belmarsh prison, this high security prison where hardened convicted criminals and rapists and terrorists are held. Just remember, Assange has been convicted of absolutely nothing. So he asks to, as is his right as a special rapporteur, to go and visit Assange and assess the condition of his health, and he takes along an international medical team. All sorts of obstacles are put in their place, but they can't. The authorities can't prevent him from actually visiting Belmarsh and assessing Assange's physical and mental state, which they find to be he's in a terrible condition. And he publishes what he communicates these findings to the British government, to reject his findings, and in fact they try and use the findings to isolate Assange even more, which is engenders the further deterioration of his health. What saddens him is the fact that he contacts all the mainstream media and say that he'll be available for questions at lunch. No one turns up except someone from RT, Russia Today, and he says that had the Anglosphere of media such as the Guardian, the BBC, the New York Times, and Washington Post conducted a sustained campaign, Assange could have been, in fact, released. It would have been successful. And he points to a particular case in Russia where they tried to stitch up a well-known journalist, and all the Russian mainstream media saw what was going on, and Putin actually personally intervened. So I'm going to finish off with this one short quote. He says, "Even the highest British court appears to be prepared to betray the rule of law for the sake of a desired political outcome. The blatant failure of three branches of government to uphold the rule of law when dealing with the case of Julian Assange seriously calls into question the stability and reliability of Britain's democratic institutions." Basically, in thinking about this, I've sort of tried to present a kind of topology of liberal democracy and the place of the crown. I've tried to present it diagrammatically with pictures.
I'm going to go to Malcolm now because he's had his hand up for ages. Malcolm, I'm going to bring you in to ask a question of Russell.
Yeah, I think what this shows that people, if people think they're living in a democracy, they're obviously completely fool or fooling themselves. Because once you annoy the ruling class, they're going to come down on you like a ton of bricks, which obviously what WikiLeaks did. But what I'd be interested in asking is which part of government is actually driving this? Is it the Home Office? Is the Home Office in charge of extradition, aren't they? Am I right or wrong? Is it the Home Office that's driving all this or being made to drive this?
Well, that's a very interesting question, because when Meltzer cites it must either a Foreign Office Minister or a Home Office Minister, Alan Duncan. I forget what he was, but Alan Duncan being extremely exercised to somehow winkle Assange out of the Ecuadorian embassy to satisfy the requests of the US. So certainly at governmental level, they were extremely keen to get to basically set a process in train to get Assange to America. So I don't know what.
You don't know. I can't remember what Alan Duncan. I mean, I don't live in England, so Alan Duncan is a name I'm familiar with, but I can't remember what he ever did.
Someone else should be able to clarify on that.
Okay.
Can anybody else let us know? Hang on, I'm just going to add spotlight. Can anybody else help us with that one? I'm actually amazed that this is the story. That's how I didn't understand that this is how they've got Julian Assange. He'd obviously gone to Sweden. They trumped up these ridiculous charges in order to get him extradited to America to face the indictment that they'd held against him, that he'd published classified documents. So this was all a ruse to get Assange accused of something in Sweden so that he could be extradited to America to stand trial for what they wanted him for. I hadn't understood that at all. It's come as a great revelation to me, actually, Russell. I didn't know that's what they'd done. It's ridiculous.
Well, that was yeah, it seems that was what they would sort of avoid problems with the in the UK because Sweden has a precedent, basically a precedent which makes it easy for the US to get people it wants to the US. It's basically there's some technicality. It's a temporary thing where they don't have to go through full due process and everything. They kind of Sweden lends the suspects to the US, and then the US just keeps them. And if you look at the book cites the examples of I think it's two Egyptians. So like the UK does, as far as I know, at this point in time, didn't have that, but they eventually gave up on Sweden because the Swedes had tied themselves up in terrible knots. There wasn't sufficient evidence to convict him. And one very important thing, which Meltzer also points out to, the mainstream media deliberately fails to pick up a key witness in the US indictment of Assange, who is who worked on WikiLeaks, is either Norwegian or Icelandic, is a convicted fraudster, molester of underage children. This is a bad, a convict. He repudiated his evidence and basically says he gave this false evidence because he was offered and a kind of some absolution of his crimes by the FBI, and the press the media hasn't picked it up at all.
Well, they wouldn't, would they? Not the mainstream media. I've got John and Peter and Steve. So I'm going to bring in, thanks very much, Malcolm. I'm going to bring in John now. So
thanks, Carol, and thanks, Russell. Basically, is there a transcript of the extradition proceedings? Do you get, does such a thing exist? It should do, shouldn't it?
I presume so, but I wouldn't know.
It wouldn't be in Hansard, would it? No. Would it be? I don't know. But what I'm unfamiliar with are the usual issues on which an extradition case is decided on, and what the respective arguments were in this extradition case, and what was the reasons given, and what was the defense that was offered, and who represented Assange, and what was said, and who made the final decision. And is that is it a usual practice, after administrative practice, after an extradition proceedings have been gone through, for somebody then to be held for such a long time in a high security prison, not in the country it's been agreed that they be extradited to, but in the country which is extraditing them? It all seems a bit very odd to me.
Yeah, absolutely. Very odd. I'll bring Peter and Steve, and then you can answer all the questions. So I'm going to bring in Peter Grant.
Thanks, Carol. Yeah, first of all, the question on what department's in charge. It's actually the Home Office. They're responsible for the courts and the prison service, and the Home Secretary is the one that has to sign off the extradition request as granted. So it will be it will land on once the 2 days hearings completed, it will land on the Home Secretary's desk. And no doubt they will sign it off, because they won't have gone to all this trouble and not do that. It is a mockery. I mean, it's a complete and utter farce from day one, as you quite rightly pointed out, Russell. I'd just like to add one thing into all of this. Is if you cast your minds back, there was a young British man riding his motorbike past an American airbase in Sussex, I think it was, or somewhere. And a woman, an American woman, came out of the airbase, drove on the wrong side of the road, hit the motorbike, and killed the young man. And the police wanted to have the woman questioned on dangerous driving charges. Nothing remotely like Assange, but the US completely blocked it, told the British government and the Home Office to go sling their hook, that there was no chance that this American was going to be questioned, not even charged, questioned on what had happened, and promptly gave her diplomatic immunity and gave her a job in the CIA, I believe it was. So she's sitting at home pretty in the United States with no major hoo-ha in this country about the Americans not granting this extradition request. So it only works one way, as everything else does in this world at the moment. But I think that is interesting. The other thing is that the Australian government are now calling for Assange's release. They're saying he's an Australian citizen and therefore got right to call for him to be released under the protection of the international law on protection of country citizen. So it's not just, there is quite a support for Julian. The fact is that it's not reported. You don't see any of this on the BBC, the ITN, or in the papers. There was a little bit in the Guardian, I believe. On the BBC News app. There was a piece about Assange in there today. But that's the first time there's been anything for a long, long time. And I find this, that we shouldn't have any illusions in this. This is how it all works. There's no way that you're going to get justice in courts. They find these old useless cretins of judges to come out with a wig on to rule on things. They're corrupt. I mean, Russell has outlined the corruption in this case. I remember back to 1977 when I was arrested outside Grunwick's, fighting for the rights of those Asian women to have a trade union and decent paying terms and conditions. And I was charged with assault on police, which I'm very proud of, by the way. And the upshot of it was that I was expected to go inside for 3 months. But over the weekend, I was due in court in Willesden Magistrates Court on the Monday. Over the weekend, the Socialist Challenge newspaper published an article where this new magistrate that was being brought in to sort these pickets out, these Bolsheviks, that had been down the dentist, and under the glare of the lights and the drill going, actually confessed that she'd been, she was going to sort these pickets out, and they were all going to jail. And when we got to the court hearing on the Monday, the solicitors, Thompson solicitors, raised this case, and surprise, surprise, no 3 months, £100 fine, clear off, and they didn't even bother to restrict me from not attending the picket. So we basically stepped out of the courthouse, straight on a bus, a minibus, back to the picket line. and that was that. Aslef paid the fine, and that was that. So that's how that's my experience of British justice, and as I say, I'm rather proud of that.
Let me go to Steve now. Steve?
Thank you, Russell, comrades. And I mean, I agree with all the points saying that comrades have made. One of my, and I think it was very good, by the way, Russell, to begin with Alexei Navalny. And I think we should be very sympathetic to him and very supportive of him, even though he might be a bit right-wing, I think some people say. I don't know how much he was. It's really got nothing to do with it. Somebody's being persecuted and by the state, then we, as Democrats and socialists, fully support them 100%. And it's outrageous what happened to him. But the hypocrisy, you're right to say, is how come this country is so supportive of him and completely leaves Julian Assange literally almost rotting in jail, you might say. And I think that's the way the hypocrisy's got to go in making that point. And I do think it is a point that should be made very much. I think that in many ways, I think this case is, I've always felt this case is so important because it illustrates the true nature of our justice system, of our laws, our constitution. I mean, you mentioned, Russell, the rule of law, the freedom of press, having a fair trial, the freedom from persecution. These are things that should be the rule of law. They should be in our constitution. Assange should be able to turn to the constitution and take these ministers to court. You know, if that was possible, because we don't have any of that in this country. They make the rules up as they go along. And I do think it illustrates to me what we mean by crown power, because we use the idea of crown power to encompass not only Her Majesty's, it would have been, His Majesty's government, His Majesty's judges, His Majesty's prisons, and outside of those three, I think the press as well, which press is actually part of that system, actually, I would say, the national press, all working together on this particular case. And to remember, he's not had a trial, Julie. There's been no trial in Sweden. There's been no trial in this country. All we've really had is he breached bail. He's had a bail hearing for a case which was withdrawn. So he's innocent till proven guilty, and yet he's still in jail. And Peter was good to remind us of that case. I think that we have changed our extradition treaty. So in a way which helps the Americans, but not us. I remember another case, I don't know if any comrades can remember it, about somebody I think did something with computers, broke into American
Barry
system.
McKinnon.
Yeah, him, exactly, the person. And that was another extradition case, and it turned out that the government had passed extradition laws that allowed the Americans to literally pluck people out of this country, but we would not be allowed to this country would not be allowed to do the same in reverse. We've got very biased, which of course only replicates the fact that we are subordinate to the Americans, that the crown power is subordinate to American power in all of that. So there is so much. I mean, it's quite a complicated thing. I think there are so many aspects of this. I imagine myself, and we talk about conspiracy theories, I guess somebody probably, if we knew the truth, and conspiracy theories exist because we don't know the truth most of the time. But I would have imagined that there's a whole section of people in America who were planning to get him and set about how to do it. And probably persuaded him to go to. I mean, I could imagine, in my conspiracy theory hat on, he was persuaded to go to Sweden, and they thought that was a good place to get him. And everything that triggered off from that point was probably planned by somebody or other as a means of getting him. I wouldn't be surprised. Maybe we'll find the truth of that one day. That's only a conspiracy; it's not fact. But it seems suspicious to me that so many things have taken place that all seem to fall into place in that particular case when you tell that story. I think the left, I think we on the left, and I'll finish on this point, have, you know, we're all part of this. I think we failed really to do enough to get the support for Julian. I really do, and I think we all, you know, it passes us by. I mean, I was at a meeting and I said, well, we've got these massive Palestinian demos. Julian Assange's name should be at the front of those demos. There are Palestinian political prisoners. There is a political prisoner in our jails, the most important political prisoner in our jails. And we should be trying to make links between Julian Assange cases and all other industrial disputes, political disputes, and the rest of it. Try to bring that into the mainstream. And that's what I think we as a left have really failed to do, I'm afraid. I mean, the massive forces against us, obviously. Anyway, I'll finish there.
Okay, so right. Can people see it?
Most of it.
Yeah, yeah. So I mean, you can't. It's not show. Oh, I see. I've got to scroll.
Yes, yeah. I can't quite. It's so big. I can't. Let me just see if I can. No, it's very difficult to show all of it in one go.
Yeah. Okay. So
Sorry.
basically, I've just tried to draw some spatial connections with the crown at the apex. The blue is really Whitehall, the civil service, and it's then of course the main thing is Parliament, the legislature, which is underwritten by the people. In my most recent thing, I've got the electorate. It gets its legitimacy from the electorate, and then if you scroll right down, you have the supposed independent judiciary, rule of law. So the how can I say, the nub of the fundamental coordinates of liberal democracy is the idea that you have freedom. If you scroll even further down, you have freedom of assembly, which relates to the people, and freedom of expression, freedom of the press, and the separation of branches of government. In relation to the Assange case, we're most interested in how independent and separate the judiciary is, because the judiciary is meant to regulate the relations between executive and legislature and the people, and sort of to ensure that the people get justice. Of course, I haven't included in this diagram, deliberately haven't included the repressive arm of the state, namely the police and the military, because in a sense, that's it's sort of all it's all implied. They the sort of they the kind of guarantors of this system. They the last, the final recourse when things don't work. You know, so I mean, it's just basically a diagram to help people, to provoke discussion and debate. Certainly not the definitive, the definitive thing. And I think I added, you should add under people electorate. And what is the civil service if not the crown, kind of the crown, in a sense, in action? They do the legwork. They're the donkeys that ensure that the crown state sort of functions, but that's obviously subject to discussion. Anyway, that's it was to help my thinking. I should have presented this at the very beginning of my talk, but with such little time, it's hard to figure out how to proceed. So thanks. I'm glad, so having spent time putting it together, I'm grateful to be able to display it.
Yeah, it's quite impressive, actually, Russell. Thank you very much. I'll
you.
stop sharing now.
Yeah.
And I'm sure we can get that sent out to people. If you email it, you have emailed it to me, and I can get it sent out to people.
Right.
They can look at it at their leisure, perhaps with some notes from you as well. That would be really, really good.
Okay.
I'm going to bring in Mark now. I'm going to bring Mark Metcalf in.
Okay, thanks. I've been a member of the NUJ for 20 years plus. After I moved home to the northeast to help look after my father in the latter part of his life, and took up some writing and attempted to get paid for it, and the NUJ were good enough to allow me to join even after I'd earned my first 100 quid from payment. Ironically, that payment was actually from the Guardian newspaper, a newspaper which I subsequently went on to get absolutely no work from, even though during that period of time and before it, the Guardian newspaper used many quotes and comments from the political work that I engaged in and have engaged in since. I've got a number of points I'd like to make. I've been very supportive of the Julian Assange campaign and work, signing petitions and where possible, raising the issue, including during my ill-fated period of time in the Labour Party until relatively recently, I would suggest. A couple of things. Firstly, of course, Julian Assange's imprisonment is different to what would happen in other countries. He would probably just be killed, to be fair. There are hundreds of journalists on an annual basis who are being killed or put in prison, and by de facto killed whilst being in prison. And it's terrible what's happened to him. It's horrific. The situation, however, is complex, isn't it? Julian Assange is not a socialist. The Wikipedia project was, of course, a project aimed at profit, in essence. And one might say that, did he understand that what he was doing was likely to lead to this? Because my small pieces of politics before it became pretty obvious, despite some of the big stories that I have, that they would never get published. When I first started doing some work, I'm not going to go into the newspaper. I've got a lot of mates of mine who are army or ex-army lads, and as you would expect, come from the northeast, and I know quite a few people. And one of them, he'd done some really brave things, to be fair, and at the same time, he'd also done some really horrendous tales. And I got a regional newspaper to agree to run these really brave things, followed by some of the things which would be difficult in most papers to run. And we managed to get the really brave things done, where he went back, he rescued his comrades, he brought back their bodies after they'd been killed by insurgents. But we couldn't get the other bits to be run. We had 3 stories to run over separate Saturdays in 2004. And what happened was the MOD phoned up the regional newspaper and said that they would prefer if they didn't run those stories. There's nothing illegal about the stories whatsoever. And so they pulled all 3 stories. The deputy editor of the regional newspaper quit on the spot, and he packed in being a journalist almost entirely on the spot. And as far as I know, he's never actually returned to be a newspaper. I don't think he's ever worked on the newspapers. I've certainly never heard of him since. And to me, that was a glaring example of that. Even if you could get good stories, the newspapers wouldn't actually publish them because they're too controversial. in many respects. So you sort of settled down in my case to do stories for progressive newspapers and organisations like The Big Issue and the North Magazine, Unite the Union, and stuff where you think at least it'll be getting out to people who you'd hope politically were on the same side as you. I've never quite worked out if Julian Assange actually realised what might actually happen to him, whether he actually considered it might happen. I mean, he is a libertarian, isn't he, in that respect? So my feeling was that he'd misjudged what would actually happen to him, because politically he didn't have the politics to understand what capitalism will actually do to it, and particularly imperialism. That aside, none of that says you shouldn't, of course, should support him. Obviously, what it's been demonstrated in courts that it's not there to protect his liberty. I think also this case further demonstrates that the UK is actually largely a protectorate of the USA, and that's been glaringly and apparently, grossly shown in the last few months, become increasingly the case. So any threat to US security is taken in this country now as a threat to UK security, and we can expect increasingly that to be the obvious situation as we move forward. The Guardian newspaper has been mentioned, and I can't remember what this is. It's gone out of my brain. This is a very complex case, isn't it? But one of the Guardian newspapers, journalists, I'm sure, played some small role in what happened to Julian, but I can't remember off the top of my head, so I won't go on to talk about that. And of course, the Guardian is well steeped in the support of imperialism. It's not got to be forgotten also that sections of the left, as they would describe themselves, or proto-imperialists as I would describe them, the Alliance for Workers' Liberty for one, they were in favour of Julian Assange going back to Sweden, which would have almost certainly sent him on to America within a very short time. It's nothing more than what I expect from such an organisation, to be fair. The final thing is, of course, there is never likely to be an attempt by the NUJ to produce the only defence which would really be the case of any of its journalists, and that would be to defy the anti-union laws by trying to bring out NUJ members. That's never going to happen, not in a million years. I think that's all I can think to say. The case is horrendous, and you've just got to hope that for the last minute that he doesn't get obviously sent. Cheers for that. I forgot. I can't remember the exact things. As I said, it's really massively complex and stuff. Anyway, with me sore throat aside, thanks for listening. Cheers.
Thank you very much, Mark. Steve, I'm going to bring you in again.
Yeah, you put in the chat actually an answer to what Mark said, I think, Carol, didn't you?
Yeah.
The Guardian basically, and this is what Mark was saying. The Guardian basically was in alliance with Julian Assange at one point, as I understand it. Again, I can't remember, like you, Mark, I can't remember all the details, but they were working with him and doing certain things, but at some point they dropped him in it, or they didn't do something, and he was left out. And he may indeed have been naive. I think it was a period where both he was a libertarian, he believed in telling the, doing the truth, good democratic values, you could say, exposing what was going on, and of course using that technology. He was at the cutting edge of that technology at the time. What WikiLeaks seemed to be doing seemed to be cutting edge at that time. So that is true. And I think that point about the US is also very, very important. And one of the thoughts I did think about how I think there was a point when what you might say liberal opinion in this country that was backing Julian Assange, he was more widely supported until and we get these same issues. This case, smear campaign. And it's very difficult to know. So we hear that he's involved in possibly rape, possibly some something that he's done to women. Or we hear in Jeremy Corbyn's case the fact that, you know, that there's anti-Semitism or blah, blah, you know, all these things. And it's quite difficult at that point to know if it's true or not. Because obviously we're not supporting anybody. We're not supporting rape, and we're not supporting people being anti-Semitic. So we have that moment of kind of wobbling, trying to work out what the hell's going on here. You know, is this true? Is it not true? And I think that's the point when the smear works, because I think what it did was Julian Assange at that point lost, I think, a lot of support amongst the wider society, and was only left with support among some sections of the trade union movement and the left more generally. And he's kind of been left out. The smears set, just same as they did for I mean, Jeremy Corbyn, that whole thing about anti-Semitism, again, you know, most people didn't believe it was true, but nevertheless, I think it was damaging in the same sort of way. And I think, how do we know as individuals or people when these things that we don't, you know, that women's oppression or anti-Semitism, how do we work out what else going on at those points? So smears work. So I think that I always found what you have to do at the end of the day, whatever happened to him, however bad he was, good or bad, you still must defend him. You must defend his civil rights and civil liberties, his right to a fair, all those things. I think I remember having arguments with people on the left about was he involved in rape or not, and I kept saying at the end of the day we still defend his right not to be arbitrarily imprisoned, no matter what we think. Whatever these other things were, that's a separate case. And I think that's quite a difficult one for us to handle. So I'd be interested to see what other comrades think.
Yeah, I mean, it seems to me that whole thing was set up in Sweden. It must have been. It was all set up to trump up some charges to get him extradited to America. It's quite obvious what's gone on there. Absolutely unacceptable. I'll probably be accused of being a conspiracy theorist here, but it just seems to me it's just too much of a coincidence that he ends up in a conference in Sweden and he gets accused by these two women and is allowed to leave. But of course, that's a grounds for extradition. It just seems too convenient to me. Although I may be straying into conspiracy theories now.
No, in this case, there is a conspiracy, and I would strongly recommend this book. He enumerates the conspiracy. There's you know, from the moment he enters Swedish sovereign territory, the wheels of the intelligence services are set in motion to subvert the rule of law and due process, and nobody does, you know, the people who ask questions in Sweden are kind of shifted aside. But can I say something about the media, which is very important? Of course, in my talk, I haven't spoken. I've hardly referred. Well, I didn't refer to why this case is so important, because it basically exposes crimes that have been committed by the US and its allies, in other words, by the rich and the powerful, which they believed they could always keep secret. Now, you know, I took that as given. Everybody probably in this forum is well aware of that. But what Meltzer points out about the mainstream media, Guardian, BBC, Sky News, etc., is they have lately come on board warning about the consequences of an extradition to the United States, the consequences for freedom of expression, a free press, albeit it's too late. And he says there should have been a sustained campaign, certainly in the Anglosphere. But the point that he raises, the most important point, which would resonate with a public that believes that we have a fair system of democracy and democratic accountability, etc., etc. He says, while the press has taken up the consequences, albeit too late, what they haven't done, and what's most important, none of them have questioned the process. In other words, the subversion of due process and the rule of law. The press is reluctant to question the judiciary, which is clearly bent, is clearly corrupt. And I think Peter sort of thought for a moment you had disappeared. I mean, what Peter points to is something that is, I guess, we need to reflect on. If you pose a threat to the state in any way, don't expect the state to behave according to the principles it tries to arrogate to itself when it compares itself with other countries or states like Russia, to pretend that we're superior, we occupy the moral high ground. And you can already see the way they've I mean, this is slightly off the point, but you can already see in relation to the Palestinian solidarity demonstrations, where they are now beginning to get scared and they're trying to curtail the freedom of assembly. You know, they're trying to prevent, I mean, they haven't succeeded so far, but you can already see it. It strikes fear in people. They might not want to go on demonstrations. They might not want to become involved with the Stop the War Coalition or the Palestine solidarity. So I suppose all I was in my talk, I just wanted to sort of try and concentrate on how an independent judiciary in whatever system, even in our ideal utopian socialist system, if you don't have an independent judiciary that can regulate the relationship between the people and the sort of executive, it's a huge problem.
Absolutely, Russell. Maria has put something really rather good in the chat. She doesn't want to contribute it, so I'm going to read it. She said, under Starmer, the Crown Prosecution Service told the Swedish prosecutors not to come to London.
Right.
Emails in which they did this were destroyed and only recovered by a Freedom of Information request at the Swedish end. And you'll recall that when, after a further 7 long years, Swedish prosecutors finally did interview Assange in the Ecuadorian embassy, it resulted in the Swedish investigation being dropped. So we're back to our dear friend Starmer having his sticky fingers in all of this as well. Had Starmer not prevented it, the Swedish investigation could have been closed in January 2011.
Absolutely. And what Meltzer points out in his book is that someone from the Home Office communicates with the Swedish authorities and says, here, we in England, this is not an ordinary we're not treating this as an ordinary extradition a case. And of course, under Starmer's stewardship, they basically tell the Swedish, don't you dare get cold feet. They want them to they want them to proceed. But the important thing in all of this is that this all had nothing to do with Assange being a flight risk, as Melter points out. He said this is all about keeping Assange quiet. They've got to take his voice away. And he is extremely worried that either Assange is going to collapse mentally, in which case they can consign him to a psychiatric institution for life, which will you take his voice away completely, or he will die from cardiac. He's already had a mini stroke. If he dies, the issue then he, of course, is completely silenced. The one thing they don't want to happen is that he walks away scot-free, because they're sending a message to people that if you do what WikiLeaks did, the same thing might happen to you. So, our press, the freedom of expression has been effectively hobbled, and our courts do nothing to protect it because they're also hobbled via corruption.
Absolutely. He's a living example of don't you dare publish don't you dare air our dirty linen in public.
Right, yeah.
Because this is what's going to happen to you if you do that. Yeah, absolutely. Right. Well, I think I can't see any more hands up now, so I'm going to draw the meeting to a close. We have gone over the 90 minutes that I wanted to keep it to, but it has been fascinating. I've learned so much, Russell, from your presentation, that I had no idea how all of that had worked. At the Swedish aspect and then being forced into the Ecuadorian embassy. So thank you very much indeed. And I hope that, I can't be there at the High Court tomorrow, but I know that a lot of people are intending to, and to show solidarity, support to Julian at his, I think they're called permission hearings that are taking place tomorrow and the day after. But I hope many of you can get there and show solidarity to Julian, because he is literally being tortured to death.
Absolutely.
In the UK, having committed no crime whatsoever and never been allowed a proper trial with a jury. It is a disgusting, awful miscarriage of justice. And I think meetings like this and support shown at the court are so important to let us know what's happening.
John Tuman says no one has responded to the points I made or the question I asked.
Okay. Sorry, John. Right. Could you just, I didn't realize that
why did the Swedish woman go to the police rather than a hospital to get Assange to take an HIV test? I think
that was a minor thing, but what I asked in the Q&A was about the why was Assange in Belmarsh? Was it because these extradition proceedings had been completed? Who took the decision? And what is the norm in terms of extradition proceedings, and how did this case deviate from it? Was there subsequently, I think, Russell, you clarified that someone clarified that the Home Secretary made the final decision. But they would have overwritten a legal decision made by, was it Judge Snow in the extradition proceedings? So
No.
is Julian there in Belmarsh because the extradition proceedings have run their course and he is to be extradited? In which case, why is he still there?
Okay, can I quickly answer that? I kind of thought I may have answered. Julian, a normal firstly, if it was just a normal extradition case, he would have been fined a few £100 for being in technical violation of his extradition, and he would have walked free. The reasons he's in Belmarsh, and people who violate extradition aren't sent to a high security jail for terrorists and high risk convict. He's in Belmarsh as a form of punishment and as a form of torture. That's why he's in Belmarsh. They put him there, and it's a way of keeping him silent. It's like deep in the south of London. It's not that easy to get to, but basically he's there because it's a form of punishment. And obviously the directive to put him in Belmarsh comes from very much from up high. It's probably a government decision in conjunction with the judiciary, which have come to this cozy in the case of the judiciary corrupt consensus that they're willing to bend to the political will of the government.
I mean, can I just
but Russell, that I get the political point of why he's in Belmarsh. What I don't get, there must be some kind of legal justification for it. So,
flight risk. That's their reason. He's a flight risk. If they give him bail, he will seek political asylum in some other embassy or try to leave the country, which, there are various ways of ensuring that doesn't happen. But that's their manifest pretext of why they're keeping him in prison.
So the extradition proceedings were left halfway through. There was no decision made in respect of them, or what?
They're doing it because they can, John, I think.
You can appeal. He's appealing. He's going through the legal hoops, the legal motions. If they want to tie him up.
Have they? That's my point. If they haven't gone through those, then they have not got a leg to stand on legally.
But that doesn't matter.
Well, it
doesn't matter.
It kind of does, because they have to have a justification. If it's flight risk, then that's an administrative thing. Were these extradition proceedings completed?
Yes, well, they completed in as much as it's gone through the process, and he's been able to invoke various appeals procedure. Perhaps there's one technical thing. Actually, I'm not sure if it relates to it, but it went to the High Court, who manipulated their two kinds of extradition processes or procedures. One of them is sanctioned by the British legislature and is British law. The other one is a European, something like a European Union directive, which is not part of British law. But in order for the High Court to meet the political imperatives, they turned the thing on its head. They said the British legislature must have intended the European directive rather than the one which is part of British law, which Meltzer says is a complete is a complete nonsense. So they decided to interpret British law in a way which is a complete repudiation of British law in favor of something in European law. I'm not sure if that quite answers your, but I'm just remembering. I'm remembering that thing. So they've how can I say? They've sprung various legal ruses. They're using they're using the judiciary, the so-called the arbiters, the people who are supposed to be the arbiter of the law, what's right, what's just and fair. They're using them, and they are allowing themselves to be used. So in a sense, your question, there's no answer to your question, because as Steve said, they are doing it because they can do it. There's no, tomorrow, tomorrow British justice is on trial, not Julian Assange. If the Supreme Court decides that he can't appeal against his extradition, which I fear is going to be the result, that essentially is the end of British justice. You might get justice if you're a common law thief or whatever it is, but when it comes to the politics, you won't see. That's the end of justice.
Mm.
If they've already amended the extradition treaty in order to make it Washington friendly, then why is there any difficulty, and why has he been kept in this country for so long? Does the extradition treaty remove the need to actually have a final decision on extradition?
It's still got the European Court of Human Rights, I think you'll find. Sorry, that's still hanging around somewhere.
But also they many commentators who are following this thing basically argue that Assange is not being prepared to go to the US. They actually don't want him in the US because there's all sorts of questions around the First Amendment, etc., etc. And of course, it is on record. American government officials have basically said, let's tie this guy into a judicial process that will last for years and years and years. And essentially, they are hoping that he dies. And Meltzer has picked up on that. And, he's in an extremely precarious position. So he's still got to go through. So if he wins this right of appeal, it goes to the European Court of Human Rights. God knows when they are going to listen to his case. And how do we don't know that the European Court of Human Rights hasn't been hobbled? They may also be completely bent, and I certainly wouldn't put it past them. I mean, the only court I have faith in is the ICJ, but I don't know how the hell you get a case. Well, you can't. This is, unless you take the British. I mean, I don't know why they haven't thought of sort of raising a case of in terms of the British system of justice, but it's not looking good. It's not looking good for him, whichever way you
I'll read the book.
Yeah, read the book.
Steve, yeah.
Just a brief thing, as I'm going to go tomorrow to the court, and I think Russell's going to join me there, because not most comrades are not in London. And we'll try to ask some of these questions, John, see what we can find out, because there's nothing better than being on a picket line to learn what the hell's going on. So I hope tomorrow we will learn a bit more about what's going on from all the people there who know what the hell's going on.
Have you got your orange suits?
Yeah, well, maybe I'll get one when I get there.
I'll be taking pictures and perhaps recording if there are any speeches, depending on.
Yeah. We'll let you know. Watch this space.
Yeah. Anyway, thank you very much, Russell. Thank you very much, John, for your your questions. But pursuing, not giving up with your questions. It was great stuff. Okay, so thank you. We're down to 8 now, or 7. I think John's gone too. But anyway, it's been fascinating, and I've learned so much. So thank you very much, everybody, for being here. Thank you for all the questions. Thank you for all the contributions, but mostly thank you to Russell for his lead-off talk. Thank you very much, Russell, and enjoy the rest of your evening.